Welcome to a new edition of Human Dialogues. I'm Jessica Lockhart. I am the director of the International Institute of Humanology and the proud hostess of this show that has been now going on for quite a few years. I am excited to approach a new human topic. For those of you who know us, well, this will come as no surprise, but for the new ones, the newcomers, every month, the Institute approaches a human topic chosen by our followers and readers. And it's always a human topic, and we try and approach it from different perspectives and points of view so that you, our viewers, can profit from different perspectives and different contributions. And the topic that we're going to be reaching or approaching this first year of the month, January 2024, is none other than Speak Without Fear, something that I am sure will resonate with many of you. And the approach we want to give it today is something that I might perhaps mention that I see as almost disappearing from the world. We're going to be talking about how to speak to connect. And to do this, I have two very special guests with me today on the show, two women who I am sure will help you understand this topic much better and will perhaps inspire you or give you food for thought. The first one I'm going to introduce is MANSI JASUJA, and I hope I am pronouncing the names properly. MANSI feels fortunate to have lived an unconventional story that brought her from practicing architecture in India to being a practitioner designing and hosting meaningful conversation processes in Europe. She offers a deep connection to life with humor, stories, yoga, creative inspirations, hugs, some madness, and a lot of colorful energy. She's been an environmentalist since the age of 4 and worked across several urban environmental disciplines and sectors in various international organizations. In 2008, a growing sense of climate urgency led her to reorient herself and step off the conveyor belt of success and safety. In these last decades, she's been strongly purpose-driven and focuses on facilitating participatory leadership, DEI, and empowerment through building capacity, skills, and communities. Having grown up with strong family and cultural values around social justice, equality, and being in service, she tries her best to embody these values and becoming a warrior of the heart. A warrior of the heart. She brings a strong sense of bring who you are to the room and gives permission to all to do the same if they feel ready for it. The first thing I want to say is that I am really, really certain that she's going to share some very clear insights. And the second person I want to introduce now is also a wonderful person who's going to connect both from Holland, if I'm not mistaken. She's also going to connect and speak to connect with us today. Her name is SARA HUANG. She creates spaces for difficult conversations, verbalizing and owning discomfort to enable growth and transformation. She's a heart-based consultant and human-centered facilitator who becomes most alive when she gets to craft spaces for people to recharge, reimagine, and reshape a better future together. So as you can see, we're going to have two wonderful women with us today talking about how to speak to connect. Welcome to Human Dialogues. I'm thrilled to have you both here.
Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you. Let me start this conversation by saying that perhaps more than ever in the history of humankind, a lot of human beings are speaking without the wish to connect. Many, 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 many human people are speaking today to teach, to preach, or to show off. And I think the social media are somehow helping people do this too. So my question is, first, do you agree with this? And second, what would you tell all these people who are out there, who are listening to us and who are wondering, Where did the speaking to connect capacity we had before go? And how can we deal with this? I don't know. Sarah, would you like to begin?
Thank you, Jessica. And I'm also really curious to hear what Mansi would share as well. But I think the first thought that comes to my mind is also how we are formed, our conditioning that starts with education. There's a question, do you have the answer? So there's also the environment part of it. So, and also in growing up, I also think that caretakers or we ask something, but we not always want to connect either. So I think it's first from how are we cultivating or practicing this art of speaking and listening?
Mm.
I'll stop there. Mansi?
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, Mansi, go ahead. I don't need to give you the floor. You can just step up and talk.
Sure. Well, I was really hoping to listen more to Sarah, but it's good. I'll continue. But and I love what you said, because I really think it does begin with how you're shaped and how you're formed. And I grew up in India, and which is a culture which is a lot more communal and a lot more relational. And the biggest difference I noticed when I moved to Europe is how much more individualistic Europe is, living here in this Western part of the world. And I feel a lot of it, the communication is about telling that individual thing. And in India, it's a lot more around stories. So that's such a fundamental thing that we always told stories to connect. And if you just tell knowledge or facts or data or information, that's fundamentally not connective. It's more sort of giving information. And I think that's something which I know in my way of being, it's all around stories. And so therefore I find connecting much easier, because we know what stories do to us, right? Our mind and our body and our heart. Yeah, so it's a lot to do with that. And yeah, it's true that this world is really glorifying right now speaking. And as Sarah said, for connection is also a lot around listening. So if everybody's speaking, who's listening, right? And how are we listening? So yeah.
And I think also to build on that, the speaking without fear is that even in the simple sentence of how are you in the individualistic society, if the answer is going to be actually I'm not doing that well, are we willing to hold that? Or do you just want like the right answer, which is yes, fine, thank you. So I think as a society, we have lost the art and the craft to indeed connect to stories, and then having that collective capacity to hold stories which don't have a happy kind of fairy tale or whatever, but life is with challenges, and to speak and listen. And I think without the fear is also telling us something. And instead of pushing it away, that can we welcome it, but not being overwhelmed by it. I think that's the art of it.
Mm.
It's funny because one of the questions that I had prepared for you touches on two of these things that you mentioned. The first one is that capacity to listen. Yes, the question was, what part of listening did we forget? And the question that you mentioned, Sarah, how are you? Well, I was born in the US, and I am also a mixed culture kid. I think I'm a third culture kid. I have not one culture I identify with, and I identify with all of them. And one of the things that really shocked me or shocks me in the US is when you ask people, how are you? You don't expect an answer. It's a greeting. It's not really a question. You say, how are you? How do you do? In the UK, just to say hello, not to ask a question. And it's funny to observe how we turned a deeply fundamental question into something that is not a question anymore, because people perhaps are not that keen to listen, as you are both sharing and saying. And the second part of the question had to do with what you said, Mansi. Again, being multicultural myself, I realized there's great, humongous differences in the way we communicate from culture to culture, and that is related to cultural beliefs. In certain cultures, for instance, certain people are not supposed to speak and express themselves until their elders have done so, or until they're given permission to do so. And that, of course, somehow changes the whole speak to connect idea, I suppose. So I don't know about you, Sarah, you haven't shared that yet. Maybe I can ask you now. I suppose you are also multicultural like we are. And what are your experiences, ladies? What do you want to say about these two, cultural beliefs and how they affect our speak to connect?
I love that question. And also, I think culture is the environment and the atmosphere of people coming together and shaping it. So culture can be tradition, as in what are the set of norms, like religion, so to speak, thou shalt not? Or is culture something that when people come together and we dare to speak and challenge those set of norms that are not enabling anymore, but actually harmful? So I think I grew up in Taiwan till the age of 11 and then moved to the Netherlands. And then indeed that culture clash of caretakers being the authority and saying how it is supposed to be, but then me being the one speaking the language at home and have to translate, like very practical stuff. So then there's a clash of, because I told you so, and I'll be like, yeah, but it says literally here, the Dutch law says this, and you cannot use your authority of being a caretaker to tell me this is bullshit because this is the law. So that was the first really embodied experience of, oh, wait a minute, the tradition, the culture does not cover the context anymore. What is the context that we find ourselves here, and how can we be creative with those norms? Because when we cling up to something, just like in the States or the UK, just like, hey, how are you? As a formal greeting, but without the hard part in it, then it comes something empty. And it is still a constant struggle, I think, when I encounter different cultures. So personally, when I travel back to Taiwan, and want to be respectful of the family dynamic or whatever dynamics there, but also having, I think it's listening beyond the year, so to speak, as in annual years, but also your year of your body. But it's like seeing what's going on there and then balancing. Is this the moment for me to speak and add a perspective? But also, is it just my ego want to add something? And will the thing that I want to contribute actually damage more? What is the harmony, or not even the harmony, like the connection that's going on here? And there's no right or wrong answer. So that's why it's also a practice. I also mess up and then I learn from it. Like, actually, that was more of an ego thing that I want to add. Maybe I can say something else next time or keep silent.
Nancy, would you like to add something?
Well, my ego says stay shut, But
So this is how to learn to keep quiet to connect, right? Instead of speak to connect.
right. But it's so true, like that you brought out a kind of hierarchy. It is a hierarchy in speaking, right? It's um, coming from, again, a culture where there's a strong hierarchy in terms of age, in terms of gender, in terms of position and roles. So much hierarchy in there. And, you know, being somebody who's always broken that hierarchy, I guess I'm not maybe the right advocate for speaking within hierarchy. So yeah, the speak without fear works for me because somehow I've always managed to break those norms, you know, which were expected of me, which got me into a lot of trouble, to be honest. So that brings you then to the next thing. So what happens when you do speak without fear? Because that requires a lot of holding and courage, and there's serious repercussions to, there can be repercussions. You can crack something open and create something beautiful, or you can really get the whole house to fall down, right? Because you speak something which should not be spoken, perhaps. So there's that attention to where you're speaking from, why are you speaking, what Sarah was referring to, which part of you really wants to bring that in. But there's also that thing, what might this do? You know, what is the purpose behind me saying this? Would this help me in towards that path or that purpose? Yeah. So yeah, I have lots of examples of when I spoke out of line, and I'm sure my parents will also love to tell many things here.
Yeah, there's this habit now that I see in a lot of people. When they ask a question, for example, and someone is answering, they're not really listening to the answer, but they're thinking about what else they're going to say, or how they're going to defend themselves, or what their argument is going to be. So that is also related to what you ladies are saying right now. A lot of people are not really communicating. They're just preaching. And even if they're in a conversation, they're not listening to what the others are saying. And I think that is not speaking without fear. That has a completely different root and is damaging real, true conversations that attempt to connect. And this is something I spoke about with my kids. I have a 28-year-old and a 21-year-old, and they're both very daring and very open and communicative. And we encouraged that. And this is something we discussed a lot of the times, because they have said, well, we noticed that a lot of people don't listen when we talk. They're really just preparing their answers and rebuttals. So is this also something cultural? Is it more often in certain cultures? Is it something prevalent? Is it something we see more among certain types of people? What is your experience?
Yeah, so I mean, I love the fact, Jessica, when you talk about your kids, how your face light up when you said they're very open and communicative. I can almost see like that you have memories of your kids, like flash moments. So I thank you for showing us that. And I think the word that stuck with me is when your kids shared, we notice. So there's also, even for me, a real power in, because there's some kind of narrative of when people are speaking, they're holding more power, or when they're not listening, or they're just preaching, they're the dominant one in a conversation. But often it can also be very powerful just by observing and giving back, and also in a very honest way, like, I'm not sure if you have the capacity to listen right now. And even for me, for myself to notice that, because Mansi is a mom as well, and with two teenagers, so I think she has more stories to tell. But I mean, I have, as a mom, also have to be honest. When my daughter, who's 11 and comes back and has a lot of words, I'll be like, listen, I really want to listen to you, but that's just too much information right now. Can I have my cup of tea first and then come back to you later? So I think to answer your question of how come that certain people don't have the capacity to listen or show up differently in speaking, my question would be of a curiosity of what kind of state are they in mentally, but also concerning the nervous system. Can they even have a different kind of connection? Or are they so agitated that like, okay, I'm just, throwing things out because that is what expected of me. Like the social media of, I remember growing up, there's no filter. I mean, yeah, the filters might be the makeup if you know how to do it, but you have bad pictures when you develop the photo rolls. But nowadays you can do instant stuff. So we're also doing it to ourselves. And really to cultivate that actually, what is the thing that I'm yearning? Oh, actually, it's connection. So in order to get that connection, am I in that kind of state to connect? And is the person that I want to connect with also in that state? Can we come to the term that will work for both of us or for all parties involved?
That makes me think that if we are not able to connect to ourselves, how can we connect to somebody else? If we are speaking without or with fear to ourselves, because we are telling ourselves a lot of fake stories. So there's, that filters or that kind of all kinds of instant consuming and constantly going without pause. If we can't even have a conversation with ourselves and we don't keep time for it, we don't slow down enough, how do we have the capacity or the space to listen to anybody else? I mean, I know I'm not a great mom in days when I'm really stressed and I'm busy and I'm going and I don't have the capacity to be there for my kids or my husband or anybody else who's dear to me. And I notice like my daughter is more reserved, and I do notice that if with her it's like catching rain. If she starts to speak, you better drop everything and listen, because it's like just like moonlight, it shines sometimes and you better catch it. And I've learned to do that. There are moments I missed it, and then literally hours later I'm still kicking myself like, oh, why didn't I just listen? And I think if we can just practice that with not only with our kids and our family, but also our colleagues and our friends and with the wider system, even looking at trees and noticing, hey, is this tree suffering? What does it need? I have a lot of plants. I'm also a plant mommy, and you have to be in conversation with your plants also to see what do they need. And you can only do that if you have like that brain space that you're not just busy consuming yourself, right? So there's something around fakeness and realness here.
Mansi, you said something that I think is also related to what we were discussing right now. You said we're too rushed. And I agree. We live in societies nowadays in which we have to rush all the time. We have to be in a hurry all the time. We have to do everything fast. And even, eating fast food, it comes for a reason, So I think that we forgot to take the time to really communicate and have real conversations. It's like, I grew up in Spain, okay? And here in Spain, we used to have all these after lunch times. We would eat lunch quite late, 2 p.m., and then we would stay at the table just chatting, drinking coffee, eating desserts until 6 p.m. And it was just chatting, talking, catching up, being with friends, being with family. Today, that is unthinkable. Nobody does that anymore because we're all so pressed and so rushed. And I think this is also affecting our capacity to speak, to connect. We don't give it time. We ask questions and we want immediate answers. And this is related to something else I had in mind that I wanted to discuss with you ladies, which is that the younger generation seem to prefer to text rather than to talk. My kids, again, going back to them, they were telling me that they somehow feel anxiety, when they have to telephone somebody and speak. They'd rather just text. They'd rather just send an email. And they tell me this is really, really common among their friends. They're afraid to talk. And so they'd rather text. So if we mix both things, this fear of speaking in person or using their voice, and that hurry that we're all immersed in, where does communication go? Where are we going as human beings? A fundamental part of who we are is communication. We are communicative beings. We communicate. We do that from day one, even with our crying. And in spite of that, we are facing these two situations that are getting more and more complicated every day. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to my mind is about the texting instead of wanting to speak. I wonder it's because we are also expected to respond so quickly to everything. And I wonder what would happen if we would shift to a culture where there's slowing down in decision making, in responding, even in conversation, I mean. And I noticed that, for example, I live in Holland. I have reasonable level of Dutch, but it's not still my first language. And sometimes it's just to give an example. There was this moment I was in a Zoom call with two Dutch people, and they were speaking in Dutch with each other, and I could follow it. But in order to give a response, I needed more time. So what happened as a result in this conversation is I couldn't come in because by the time I formulated a response in the language, they had already moved on. And that was okay. It wasn't okay, but it was how it was. But that's interesting, right? Because what I noticed, both Sarah and I are our practices, one of our shared practices, the art of hosting and harvesting meaningful conversation. And there is a lot of spaces where we slow down and we give pause, which is really important for us to land whatever we have heard in our mind, in our heart, in our body. We can actually give time then to note, okay, what is this actually doing to us, you know? And then there is space, and then you respond, which also means maybe it's not always the extrovert or the ones who are normally the first to say something. Maybe the quieter voices or the ones which have other language skills can also come in. And I think that's what's really missing right now in the society, in that rush of speeding up. And to bring it back to your question, I think texting in that way can also be fast, but you don't have to respond immediately, and you can take away a layer of emotions. I wonder if it makes it more safe I wonder if there's an element of safety here, and how could we then make actual conversations more safe for this generation? My husband also likes to, by the way, text. He's a different generation, but.
And I think to build on that, maybe a strange metaphor, but somehow in the 90s, that cartoon, the Mutant Ninja Turtles, come to my mind, because I think every culture has its own preference, like the primary identity, so to speak. As Jessica, you spoke earlier of the Spain you remembered, of taking these time and to really to connect. There's also the other side of that people might have to work longer hours and make up, but it gets like romanticized in a way, because then I can remember like me growing up in the 80s in Taiwan, like America is seen as the efficient, or the Western as the efficient. So there's a saying in Mandarin, the moon of the moon abroad seems brighter and rounder than in your own. So there's something of something from afar is better. And also, I think this fear, so to speak, of oh yeah, I rather just text. You know, it feels awkward, or there's discomfort in phoning someone. We have that as well. Remember that when someone called, you don't even know who it is. The telephone just rang. There is no number recognition or whatever, and you're like, especially if it's someone you like, no. But that was the practice. There was no escape. There was nothing that, I mean, yeah, okay, you can write a letter or something, you know, you could, but then it takes forever. So I think is this conditioning, and then it comes back to the shaping of acknowledging that that fear is real and that is something of all times, but then intentionally shaping the kind of condition and space to deal with it. Of that, oh yeah, it is, it, you know, it is easier to I mean, it's romanticized in a way of, yeah, if I can just formulate a message in my own time and on my own terms, and I don't have to be confronted by what others might say back, why not? You know, give me, shut up and take my money. But if you're like, no, actually, for some conversations, I know it's going to be awkward. I know that sometimes we don't have words to say at that moment, but it's okay for us to sit together, and it's okay when you don't know how to reply. I will sit with you, and I'm not afraid of those feelings. And we are not afraid of those feelings. We can get through this together. So just to, like in the practice, what Mansi and I shared, but also in other, you know, practices of this intentionally stepping up, just going even back to the example you share of Spain, that even these slowing down time is also intentionally shaped. Like, hey, you know what? Let me just sit here, and you're more important than whatever's going on. So there is a choice there. But the intention has to be there. Otherwise, it's just a form of, oh yeah, we have to sit here for hours, for 4 hours, not really talking about anything. Yeah.
Yeah, see, there's that. And something that I think is also a result of what we've been discussing is that a lot of younger kids have great difficulties today with confrontation. Because when you text, you don't actually hold a conversation. You send messages out. And those messages are also tone deaf. There's no intonation. There's just words or emojis or, you know, but then they don't really know how to interact in real situations. And as a result of that, whenever somebody doesn't agree with them, disagrees with them, they're like paralyzed because they don't know how to react in a proper way. So I think that the combination of both things and that situation that we are facing in the world today is something that many introverts might use because they feel more comfortable behind that shield created by the screen they're sitting in front of. But I also think that when you're not an introvert, when you're an extrovert, you end up creating other channels of communication, you know, and when people only use texting, the extroverts that really want to communicate still do that outside of the telephone. I don't know if I'm making myself clear. But one more thing that I wanted to add about this, and I want your thoughts on this, is when these young people get used to texting and never talking, and they develop this habit, then it's going to be much harder to break in the future. What is our role as the elders in society? How can we help our kids Also be ready not for the world they're creating, which is the texting one, but also the world they might encounter if something happens. Imagine they have to go somewhere and their phone breaks and they have no replacement. They're going to have to talk. They're not ready for that. So any tips on how to help the younger generation master both things at the same time?
Yeah. Yeah, I was just thinking, I'm not sure if this is universal. This, I think it depends on who they are speaking or texting with. Because I do notice with my kids, they both do like to speak to their friends at least. So yesterday night, my daughter has exam week, and I go up and I hear some sounds, and she's studying and she's calling with her friend and sort of live studying at the same time. And I think, yeah, that's just really important to her to have like that, the intonation and the depth that comes with listening to somebody's voice, all the laughter and all the which you can't easily get in text. So I'm not sure if this is a universal thing. And I think human nature is so strong in terms of our need to connect, whether it's with one person or 10 people, that depends. I think we will find our way back to some people, at least, to that deep conversation. I think they, yeah, I don't know. I'm quite optimistic and hopeful around it. And I also know that things shift. The way we are is very different than the way my parents were. And we cannot stop that shift from happening. It's just rediscovering a lot of humanity does, or what does it mean to be human in that way. And also I notice with my daughter, she has very strong control over her own screen time consuming. She really puts away her phone. If she wants to read a book, she leaves the phone on a different floor, and then she moves with the book for 2 hours or so. And she says, I know, because if the phone is around, it'll distract me. So if I want time away from it, and knowing Sarah, you had this great thing of getting lost in the forest last week, right? Without your phone. How did you connect and speak
Did
without?
you purposely, unwillingly get lost in the forest?
That's a nice story to share here.
That's a very nice story. That was during the open space of Art of Hosting, and because Art of Hosting, we were having really deep conversations on systems change and complexity, and there was also a lot of words. So on the third day or the second day? Yeah, the second day of the open space, I was like, oh, let's have a nature walk, so that in solitude, so you can listen to the nature. So I went out, and there was a voice in the back of my mind, like, should I take my phone? I'm like, no, that's fine. I'm just gonna go out in the forest. And I got lost because it wasn't a very Dutch forest or straightforward. Just go. There were like all kinds of, and then I end up like, oh no, it's almost sunset, and I've actually no idea where I am. And also trying to even find meaning of that, of, okay, wait a minute, what is this teaching me, and how can I be? But then I saw it getting darker and darker, like, okay, I just have to get back. I'm one of the trainers, I have to be there. So but yeah, to answer your question, I think, so my kiddo is 11, and just yesterday she said, yeah, sometimes with text, you don't hear the tone. So it's difficult to really realize what the other one is saying. And then when you share like this generation maybe don't know the importance of connection, I'm thinking, well, just think back of the lockdown, that how they're also craving for that connection. So instead of, I think, fearing for, oh, what will become of them? So that's like future thinking, because it's not there yet. it's more of, okay, that's create an experience for them. Like, I don't need that phone, this is much more fun. So yeah, I agree with Mansi, like the generations will find their way, give new meaning to it, and at the same time, as caretakers or the environment around, really keep in mind that balance of, are we getting to the mutant ninja turtle, like the form that's too much of that, and how can I intentionally, with care, with respect as well, um adding something that I think will be meaningful for you to experience something different. Because I remember there was this one really practical text exchange between my kiddo and one of her friends, like, okay, where shall we meet? And then it was going nowhere, that conversation. And she was really frustrated. And I said, you know what? Texting is like sending a car, and you're throwing a text here, she's throwing it here, but you're not talking about the thing. So sometimes it needs another space to get the information that you need to meet. And she was like, okay. So I think it's also for the caretakers to realize, I'm annoyed with something, but how have I learned it? And how is that insight of learning, how can I shape it in a way that's in this context that will be meaningful, instead of me thinking, oh, what will become of you if don't ever and that's something on the micro level, but it is listening to yourself. It is listening to what's going on at the moment and intentionally doing something that will be useful, instead of pushing away.
Yeah. Yeah, it's again connecting to purpose, right? Or kind of stewarding something to a certain direction. Yeah, it's super true.
But it's like the fear that people had at the beginning when the telephone was invented. I mean, the real telephone, not cell phones, At the beginning, people were like, that's a devil's device. We shouldn't use it. And look at what it brought us. I just brought it up because it's good for conversation too. It's important to discuss all these things for people who listen. We've been talking about young people. Let's flip it. Let's talk about the older generations. Something else that we are noticing is that in many different societies in the world, the elderly are being more and more isolated by societies. They're not listened to anymore. They lost their teaching, mentoring capacity they used to have in the past. And you, Mansi, were talking about the importance of storytelling. Well, I think that's something we are losing in some of our societies today. We're losing that capacity to connect with our elders. And I think that's a pity. I think it's a great, huge loss. What are your thoughts on this? What would you like to say about this?
Yeah, it's I think a lot of it is also uncharted territories, because people are living longer than they were living earlier. Then there's this whole shift in the way our families are structured. I mean, there was always these intergenerational living spaces earlier where, there was always, like, even if you didn't work anymore, there was still work and space and meaning for being an elder. There were the grandkids, there was this certain circulation within the family. And also the digitalization, which is now isolating a lot of older folks. So there's so much shift which is happening in the way we have always lived to the situation which is now, that it's become, elderly loneliness is a very, very big problem in every culture right now. And And I think we really need to shift attention to all of this. It's a really fundamental thing which we need to do as a society. And I mean, there are some really creative projects which are going on with bringing young people in connection with older people, or having older people part of daycares, or, just there's so many things we can do. And I mean, I notice as a sandwich generation, having little kids and elderly parents, that it's quite a difficult spot to be in, frankly. With and also the way you converse with them is, it's I really realize, we're talking about speaking without fear. And I really realize in the last 1 or 2 years, I have been able to start speaking with my parents from a different place than I have ever done. Maybe because there's both some kind of maturity, not in terms of age, but really of understanding this cycle of life. And it's a very different level of conversation, which comes out as a result. There's a lot more connection. There's a lot more respect for each other, but also the differences, not just what we share, but also why we are so different. And yeah, I wonder what are you thinking, Sarah, around this?
So two things come to my mind. First of all is we spoke earlier about connection to self and that fear. And when it comes to the older generation, especially your own parents, like staring yourself in the eye. So there's that fear of, oh, wait a minute, this is a version of me that I will become. And then can you hold that discomfort in connecting with them, even if it's not your parents? So that's one part. But also last May, I was on a road trip with my mom, who is 74, no, 76, and my daughter, who is 11. And that trip took a lot of slowing down, because it's a trip that has to tailor an elderly woman who cannot walk very well, is very slow, but is so excited to get out of her house, wants like constant entertainment. And the kiddo who is 11, but very sensitive, gets overwhelmed, can only handle like maybe one activity per day. So really to create something, and also like my husband and I, we were on occasion, we wanted stuff as well. So we really had to communicate, all four of us, like, what is important for us today, and then drop the politeness, because there is a tendency of, this is an annual vacation, you just the other one to be happy, but then end up being resentful. And then saying to my mom, maybe, listen, I know you really wanted to visit that water park or whatever, but also I can see that your granddaughter is very tired. And also, I think you're also very tired, but you don't want to commit. Can we make arrangement for tomorrow and things like that? So there is, it all starts with your own capacity first, of how am I today, and can I speak my truth, and then being able to shape a condition to speak about everyone's own needs. But then you need time. And if it's like just quick, it's like that saying from, I'm not sure which country in Africa, because it's always quoted as from Africa. If you want to go fast, go alone. But you want to go further, go together. So then it comes back to the design. When you only design 5 minutes to do something, then you just get the same result. Then it's easier to text something. But if you want to craft a meaningful language message, like the TED Talk, that 20 minutes takes a year.
Or 10.
Yeah.
There's one more question I need to ask. We've been talking about how to speak to connect with young people, with the older generation, among ourselves. But how about speaking to connect with oneself? You know, it's we are talking to ourselves all day long, and thousands or millions of people are not actually connecting with themselves. Even if they're talking to themselves all day long, they're berating, they're criticizing, they're questioning, and they're not really connecting with themselves.
Mm.
In the times of, for example, Louise Hay and her mirror work, you know, look at yourself in the mirror, talk to yourself, connect with yourself, is when people, I think, started really talking about this connection to oneself and really communicating with yourself. And I see and I hear many more people discussing these ideas and telling people to connect with themselves. A lot of people have difficulties doing this because they don't like what they see on the mirror. There's trauma, maybe. They have never learned to take care of themselves and to care for themselves. But before we finish, I would like you to perhaps approach this a little bit and give our viewers some insights you might have on whether the importance of this, or maybe how to do it better, or any thoughts you have about this, because I think that the capacity to speak, to connect with ourselves is also fundamental.
Mm.
So I can chip in with something that I share with my kiddo. It's a 3-step stuff. She has a very loud inner critic. So what we do is first we notice, how are you talking to yourself, you know, and how do you notice it in your head? And then she'll say, oh, the sentence is, oh, you're never going to do this. You know, you don't know how to do this. And then I ask her, is that sentence something like a balloon that lights you up? Or is it like a rock that makes you feel worse? And she's like, yeah, it's a rock. And okay, so then there's something that you don't need that sentence. And how can you then change that sentence? How would you say it to someone that's your best friend? Like, oh, it's hard for you, but you can try. So it's like notice and then weigh, is it a balloon, is it a rock, and then change the tone. So I think that, and something very small, but I think the most difficult part is even notice, because when you don't even notice what goes on in your head, it's like a smelly room that first you notice, and then at the end you're not even noticing because it's just in you.
Mm.
I love that. Thank you, Sarah. Yes, Mansi.
No, I was fully on board with, yes, it really does start from awareness. I think for me, personal practices, whatever they are, whatever they might be, is so important for that connection to yourself. Because in this world with the, you know, go thing, if we don't pause and give time to whatever it is that gives us joy, which you know, nourishes our mind, our body, our heart, our soul, we need time for that, because those are the moments which get us into that moment of noticing, which Sarah is talking about. For a child, it's something else. Then, you know, it's like you develop these practices. For me, it's a lot of, it's yoga, it's walking, it's drawing, it's, you know, just silence. I'm an extrovert, but I also need silence, which is really interesting. But also it's then the noticing, like, okay, then you start noticing, and then what? It's like what Sarah's talking about, the balloon and the rock. For me, it's also this society is putting so much pressure on staying positive, and that everything has to be hunky-dory and sunny and beautiful. It doesn't have to be. It's also giving ourselves permission that on a day you don't feel great, it's okay. And then you work from that space of, I'm tired, I feel cranky. You know, I do tell my kids, I'm sorry, today I'm cranky. They know it actually. They know which days to avoid me. You know, they're clever enough for that. But I also know the days I should avoid myself, right? Where I should not be making decisions, knowing today is not a good day, you know? And I think that is the courage, and that's the way we should learn to practice to be with ourselves as well, with all our You know, I have to admit, I didn't sleep well last night. This is not a good morning for me right now, but I'm here, you know, and I'm like, yeah, I'll show up with whatever I have. And, you know, luckily I have Jessica and Sarah here to, you know, fill the gaps. So yeah, that's what's coming up for me, you know, create a society which has that nuance, you know. Also, just to bring it back to the how are you, I got contacted by a classmate after 30 years who writes me an app just out of the blue. Yeah, there's some kind of reunion stuff happening. And, you know, she sends an app like, hope you're doing well, da, da, da. I mean, I actually barely remember this person. And I wrote back, you know, I'm doing as well as any human can be expected to do in this world, right? You know, there's like a bit of nuance here. And this person writes back, it seems like you're having a really challenging time right now. And I was like, okay, clearly there's no, you know, it's like the expected answer to how are you is I'm fine, you know, but that is not real for me. And I find more and more craving conversations with myself, which are no bullshit conversations, but also with each other, where we can be real and really speak how we really are. And if you don't want to listen to it, then don't ask, right?
But that's I think key, fundamental, Mansi, what you just said. Listen. And when we have these conversations with ourselves, we sometimes don't listen to ourselves. So I think that's also a fundamental part. It's not just being aware, but it's really taking the time to say, okay, so this is what's going on through my head. What does it mean? Where does it come from? So take the time to listen to yourself. That would be something I wanted to somehow add. Ladies, it's been a pleasure. We usually have to cut this conversation short. We would stay here for hours and hours, but there will be other opportunities, I'm sure. This is just opening and whetting our appetite for more of these human dialogues and conversations. Sarah, Mansi, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your wisdom. We really, really, really appreciate it at the Institute, and I am sure that our viewers will also love it. This will be published on our coming January Más Humanos magazine, and you will for sure get copies of these. And now I would like to announce that the coming month of February will be devoted to another very important human topic, which is fear of failure, another important one. And the topic for our magazine interview will be, in Human Dialogues, turning failure into a blessing. Another important set of ideas will come out of it for sure. So Mansi, Sarah, thank you again. And everybody watching the video, please share your comments, share your questions. Let's keep this dialogue alive. I'm Jessica Lockhart. This is the International Institute of Humanology. Thank you.